Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with another of these brand new 2024 Collecta releases, and this time we've got one that's very exciting. This is the Deluxe 1/6 scale Velociraptor, and honestly, this model looks so much better in person than I was expecting it to. A lot better in person than the original prototype images, if you ask me. Again, I thought it looked pretty good from those prototype images, but in person, it really is far nicer than I was expecting. It also sports a very nice, impressive size, being a deluxe figure, and in 1/6 scale, that means it would size up right around the same size as the beasts of the Mesozoic raptors, or at least a large portion of them, because I guess not all of them are 1/6 scale, but most of them. The Velociraptor, specifically in that line, is 1/6 scale, so if you do happen to have that, you'll have a pretty good idea of the size of the Collecta version. And overall, again, I think they've done a really good job on this in pretty much every aspect. The sculpt is extremely highly detailed, and the paint apps look really good on the figure here in person. So, as always, let's jump to a closer look, and we'll check it out from there. So starting up here at the head sculpt of our Velociraptor, you can see the face, the snout pretty much entirely sports some very nice skin texture, and you can see when you get nice and close, the actual texturing of the skin does look really good. You can see the nostrils right there. There's a nice variation of a brown for the face, but as you lead back toward the eye, you can see a darker variation of brown show up right there in the eye area. We also have a different shade of brown for the eye itself and a nice big black pupil, and on top of that, of course, there is a really nice gloss coat which you can see shining there, looking extremely realistic. I also like the nice fine detail there around the eye, and then you can see the lower jaw sports a small area of skin texture, but as you lead back along the lower jaw, you start to see the feathers picking up there as well. The dinosaur does have an articulated jaw. You can see the teeth are sculpted out pretty nicely, and you can see the paintwork. They are painted with like an off-white, and the teeth on the inside of the mouth as well are painted. Maybe a slight bit of sloppiness, but not a whole lot. And then if you take a look over here, you can see, again, same for the lower jaw. The teeth on the lower jaw are actually painted really nicely. Same deal for the most part when it comes to the teeth on the upper jaw, just a little sloppiness on the left-hand side. We do have a pinkish tone for the inside of the mouth of the Velociraptor. You can see the tongue sculpted out in there, and then some more nice fine detail on the inside on the upper side as well. As you move back here into the back of the neck, you start to see a nice little crest of feathers pick up, and they are painted with a very dark variation of a brown. But as you lead back from the eye, you start to see the other feathers, again, much finer feathering pick up, and it starts to increase in size the further back into the neck you get. But you can see that basically the feathers are kind of the same variation of brown that we see in the face, maybe a slightly different shade, but there is a nice dry brushing that they've applied, which really helps to make all of the feather detail pop. And for the most part, moving back, you do have finer feathers, like smaller feathers, for the Velociraptor outside of that little crest of feathering on the back of the neck. You can see some darker tones kind of running down along the side of the neck right there, and then a brighter tone of color here for the underside of our Velociraptor. Also, as you follow along the spinal column, you can see some like kind of out of place, sort of scruffier feathering here and there as you move along. Just a few feathers that are kind of poking up and not sitting the way that they, should on the dinosaur, which I think is actually a very realistic addition to the model overall. As you lead down here, you continue to see the dry brushing, and what's cool is the dry brushing has actually variations of color to it. You don't just have one singular tone of color that's been dry brushed over. You actually have like some tans as well as some sort of like off-whites and potentially some light grays. So there's a good bit of variation to the dry brushing that they've used, and on top of that, there's also some light airbrushing that's been applied, as I could see darker variations of browns from time to time moving through the course of the model, which also looks really cool. As you lead down here into the arms, you can see again we have the same style of feathering moving along the outer edge of the arm that you see through most of the body, but as you lead out here, you can see we've got a gorgeous display of plumage on the arms of the Velociraptor, and you can see again painted similarly to what we see there in the body, and obviously a good bit of dry brushing, but when it comes to the fine detail of the feathers, I think it looks really, really nice. You can see the fingers up here, and the nails are painted with a variation of a gray, and if you look at it from the underside, you can definitely get a much better look at the hands and specifically how well detailed the undersides of the fingers and the hands really are. Like, that's really impressive detailing. We also have a variation of like a yellow for the undersides of the feathers here, moving along the underside of our Velociraptor, and you can see again how good the feathers look sculpt-wise on the underside as well. As you continue to move along into the stomach, again, you can see some darker tones of color, like a dark brown here, a dark brown here, but then sort of like a lighter brown there. And again, the variation of dry brushing that's been applied, all of the really nice feathers. And you can see when you get nice and close that the feather detail is really crisp and really vibrant. Moving back into the thigh, you can see the muscle definition, but it's not overly defined, especially considering it's covered in feathers. It would be a little hard to truly define the musculature, but you can still see it. Also seeing deal with the bulging calf muscle down here. You can kind of make out the knee, but again, a little tough to really see with feathers all over it. As you lead down, you can see the foot sculpt looks really nice. We return to a nice skin texture, of course, for the foot. We've got a nice big sickle claw, and I really quite like the position of this foot and the posture here as the dinosaur's picking its foot up off of the ground, obviously moving forward. You can see the nails are again painted with a gray like we saw on the fingers, and then we do also have dew claws present there for the raptor, but the skin texture does look really good, and again the toes just kind of leaving the ground right there helps to give it a very nice kind of action pose. As you lead back up here toward the tail, again you start to see that same type of feathering, but if you look up here toward the top, you start to see the feathers increase in size, and then we lead out into an extremely impressive display of plumage leading all the way out onto the tail. And that's not often that you see Velociraptor tails kind of sculpted out like this, because a lot of the time you'll see just like the regular tail, and then out near the end you'll have like some nice plumage or something, whereas this one has very impressive plumage the entire way out there through the tail, and also painted with a very dark tone, maybe like a dark gray, and again has, you know, variations of dry brushing with that lighter tan as well as that kind of like off-white or slightly grayish tone. And they've done a very good job of bringing out all of the detail of the feathers, especially as you lead out here toward the tip of the tail. And then the underside has some brownish tones, again with some more dry brushing here running along the underside of the feathers. And you can get a good idea of like imperfections in the feathers as you look down here. Like you can see how this feather's kind of positioned, and there's like almost like a little divot kind of taken out of that feather, and then over here again a little separation between the feathers. Really like small things like that on models, because I think it just adds to the realism drastically. As you move along the underside, you can see a cloaca is present. You can also see again that light tone pick back up. There's also a little variation of color for the cloaca as we have a darker tone right there, and then you continue to see the feathering here for the underside of our Velociraptor. When you take a look at it from the opposing side, you can see the raptor has its head turned away from us now, as it's kind of, like I said, in an action pose. You can see everything looks just as nice over here as it did on the initial side. Leading down, you can see the turn in the neck and how everything's kind of stretching with the raptor turning its head toward its left. The arm is in almost the same position over here as we saw on the first side, except this one's just a little bit further forward, but pretty similar overall. You can see it's not really all that different when it comes to the overall visual. One big difference on this side compared to the other side, though, is the fact that the leg is taking a pretty far step forward here with the raptor kind of lunging forward, it almost looks like, and you can see a little less of the stomach over here because it's kind of obscured with the leg pushing into the stomach. You can kind of see almost like some slight, I wouldn't say shaggy, but more like kind of out of place feathering leading off of the back of the thigh right there. As you lead down, you can see the calf muscle. The raptor has very thin legs overall, and then again you can see this foot is planted, and then you've got these scoots moving down the toes, the very nicely sculpted foot. I think the only thing that could have enhanced the paint job of this figure, especially in this area, would have been like a dark wash or even a light wash for the skin. Definitely could have helped add a little bit of realism to it, but overall, again, this is definitely a way nicer Velociraptor figure than I was expecting, and probably one of my favorites for Collecta's 2024 year.
As far as a size goes, I guess we got to move this up a little bit further so we can get a measurement to the tail. From the snout to the tail, about 12.5 inches or around 32 centimeters. If we actually go, it's hard to tell if it's going to be further or not. From the tip of the tail to the tip of the feathers of the arm, you're looking at closing in on 13.75 inches or around 35 centimeters. So I guess you can choose which one you would prefer as the overall length. As far as a height goes, you were looking at about 4.5 inches or around 11.5 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Dilophosaurus Robert Muldoon, and the Collecta human being next to our Collecta Velociraptor. And you can see again, it does have a very nice, very impressive size to it as a whole, and absolutely is the type of model that is sized in a way where it would really stand out on any shelf of dinosaurs. When it comes to Velociraptors, we also have the movie monster style as well as the accurate style with Collecta's, as we have the Mattel Velociraptor stepping in for a comparison next to the Collecta version, which obviously the Mattel version is significantly smaller. And even though it's not actually the Beasts of the Mesozoic Velociraptor, it is still the same size, the same scale and everything, so it should still give you an idea as far as what the size would be. And in fact, most of the Beasts of the Mesozoic 1/6 scale raptors are all a very similar size. So if you happen to have any of those, I think this comparison should help to give you a pretty good idea of the size between the Collecta version and the Beasts of the Mesozoic version. Obviously showing you that the Collecta version is pretty much the same size, maybe a little bit bigger just because it has so much feathering, especially out there on the tail, but very similar in size overall. So this brand new 2024 Collecta Deluxe 1/6 scale Velociraptor is definitely a really nice figure. And as I mentioned earlier, I would say even nicer in person than the original prototype images kind of led us to believe it would be. And overall, I think it's a very, I would say, majestic looking version of a Velociraptor. Sculpt-wise, it is exceptionally highly detailed, and I think overall sports the exact type of detailing that you would like to see for a Velociraptor. And I really love the pose. I think the pose is very nice and natural, almost looking like it's slightly confrontational, like maybe there's another Velociraptor that's maybe not part of the group that this raptor is a part of nearby, and it's sort of trying to maybe show off some sort of a display of anger to strike fear into the other raptor and kind of get it away from it. I don't know, that's just kind of the way that I look at it. It also could just generally be charging in for a kill, maybe, as it's kind of running along. Also sort of has that look to it as well. But either way, I will say that I think the pose is very nicely done, nicely chosen. And then you also, of course, have the large tail feathers out there, which I think is one of the most striking aspects of this model. Really the plumage overall is very striking as a whole, but that tail specifically just jumps out at me every single time I look at it. So I'm definitely a big fan of the way they've sculpted out that massive display of plumage on the tail. The coloration is also really nice, kind of giving, in my opinion, this the look of a female. I would expect maybe a male to have a little bit brighter colors, so maybe in the future Collecta could release this again and maybe just slightly repose it and give it more of like a male sort of coloration, something, food for thought for Collecta in the future. But I really feel like this, gives you the look of a female overall with the brownish tones, and that's not a bad thing because I think it looks really good, and they've done a very good job of applying lots of variation of color to it, especially when you look there into the plumage of the arms as well as the plumage of the tail. Specifically, those areas sport a lot of variation of color, which I think adds a lot of realism to the model, and they've done a good job of choosing the tones as well as applying like the different variations of dry brushing through the course of the figure to perfectly highlight all of the detail. So if you are interested in this, make sure you keep following Everything Dinosaur so that you can stay up to date on when they are going to be stocking this. They recently made a post about it on their social media accounts and stated that it will be coming into stock very soon. So of course, keep an eye out on Everything Dinosaur when it does come into stock. Make sure you pick it up and like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.